simple calculator, that means plus, minus, divide, and numbers. Most of the time, I mean, we try to make the numbers so they really could just do them quickly on scratch paper in their heads. So they don't need a calculator, but they're allowed to have a simple calculator. No phones. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. They have to bring their own pencil. We do not provide pencils. I say this every year. I can't tell you how important this is and how simple this is, but I have students show up without a pencil or any writing utensil to take the test. There are no pencils provided. One more time. If they both want to read every question and answer it together, they can. If you want to divide the test up, they can, and then they each work on it, and we staple back together at the end. Okay, so it's up to them on how they decide to manage their time.
There's a one-time for Scantron.
Nope. They get the whole test at the beginning, and then they decide how they're going to.
And then the create the graph is a separate time or all in that same time?
All in the same time.
Okay.
It's part of the test.
Part of the test, okay.
So they can do that any way they want. Any other questions?
There's two. One, will they need to know anything on like logarithmic graphs or anything like that?
No, no. So I kind of skipped over it maybe because I know that, but pictographs.
But nothing logarithmic, and nothing
Pie
nonlinear,
graphs.
anything in nonlinear, like in the math. Do they need to know anything that would graph a nonlinear line or something like that?
Well, yes, because.
Like a curve, right?
Oh, no, not a curve,
or
sorry.
something like that.
Yeah, but they'll go up and down, they could cross the axis. I mean,
Right,
okay.
but it won't be
Right,
like
no, okay, yes.
It's more about graphing data rather than graphing a function.
I'm just trying to understand how high of
Correct.
the math do they need to
Oh, yeah.
understand? So it's only at
No,
like
it's
a
still
sixth grade
what's
level.
appropriate to, yes, correct.
Well, I mean, you can say that, but like the whether or not, that's not age appropriate. I mean, that goes all the way to
No,
college level.
for, yeah.
So on this, I just want to know how high a math do they kind of need to understand?
No, so yeah, sixth grade or first, you know. And you know, I'm sure you know this, there are some schools that only go up to fifth grade, but we separate the overall team scores as a result of any handicap that might have, right? And then from year to year, I mean, I'm getting a little bit too strategic, right? But how you decide to staff your teams, because you're only going to have so many sixth graders, is up to, you know, is up to the school coach, right? You use all your sixth graders to take this event, then who's going to take it next year, and will they be ready, right? So, yeah, that's all part of the school's coach on how they're going to. Yeah.
With the graph, on the graph paper, just the one sheet, one-sided, can you tell us how many graphs you're gonna have to try to stick in that?
Oh, just one.
Just one,
They're
okay.
they will be given a question like this. We'll take a quarter of the sheet of paper.
Okay.
The following data shows blah, 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 and then 2 sets of data.
Good, okay, thank you.
And then after that, there'll be the questions
Pertaining to the
their
graph
graph.
gesture. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
No. This, so to your point, this event is very straightforward compared to a lot of the events. So, I don't know if that puts you at ease or not. It should. There is, just as a public service announcement, there is a general coaching session that I guess we recommend you attend, especially if it's your first year doing this. It's not specific to this event, just kind of specific to the tournament itself. And then I do have a second session, I guess, if you need to participate or somebody else needs to participate.
Past tests on the website, I didn't know.
There is a past test for this.
What areas do they struggle with most?
It really varies, surprisingly. Like, yeah, it's just varies. And I don't know if it's just the trend of kids coming through the school, or if they change somehow the focus on what they do and how much practice they get in a particular area, or, yeah, or just no reason at all, just who ends up getting assigned to the event.
Do you have any recommendations on teaching percentages
In terms of,
in terms of a pie chart?
no, I mean,
Okay. Or do you?
Khan Academy.
Okay, check it out.
What did you say? Khan Academy, KHAM.
okay, I mean, if that's something that is a newer, it's all relative, right, that they're sending those kids to. Since these are leftover references from probably 7 years ago.
Khan Academy is an online source.
Or something, add that to here.
For their Scantron, they do it by, it's by school name and their number, right? That's how they gotta fill out the labels.
The team number is most important. We encourage them to add the school name,
Okay, team numbers.
so just,
Not their names.
As far as Scantrons go, like last year I did rock towns. Will they all start at number 1?
yes,
Okay,
Yeah.
that was different.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the multiple choice, 1 through 40 or 45 or whatever it ends up being, we'll start there, and then the graph ends up being the, whatever, 41 or something like that.
Okay.
Anything else? Well, I'm done. So I just want to make sure I point that out, so it's a prize at the actual tournament. And essentially what I'm doing is just counting the graph twice as much, and then that just weighs in to the multiple choice questions. Okay? And then, of course, there's some, we'll use tiebreakers if we need to. The first tiebreaker would be whoever scored better on the graphing portion. So if the team score, the combined score, is tied with someone else's, we'll use whoever scored better on the graphing portion as the first tiebreaker. And then the second tiebreaker will be a few predetermined multiple choice questions that were maybe trickier questions or something as the second tiebreaker. Okay? Any questions about the rules? Okay, so now I'm gonna move to the handout, which you didn't get one again, you're at one of them. Says some of the same things again, regular pencils, colored pencils, ruler, simple calculator if they want. No scrap paper either. There's enough pages in the test that they're allowed to write on the test. They can tear, turn it over, back pages, but no scrap paper. We'll provide 1 sheet of graph paper, and that's all they get. So they have to, you have to kind of try to help them not panic. Start with pencil, lay it out, because I won't give them another piece of graph paper. Graph paper will only be one-sided too, because it's actually going to be a Xerox copy. So they should kind of scratch out with a regular pencil that they can erase before they start to actually use color pencil where they can't erase, and, you know, give them tips like that so that they can get through it. If they make a mistake, I mean, they can kind of, I've gotten cross-outs, oh, I didn't need to put it in this bar, but this bar, they can still finish their graph relatively neat if they make a mistake, but just try to give them some, go ahead.
So if they do make a mistake, or when they do make a mistake, what would be acceptable as the, you know, is it a cross or completely scratched out?
Well, I mean, first would be if they could try to erase it, right? And then if it's, let's say if it's a bar graph, then they should just
Hash it out.
cross it out, right? And then hopefully the other bar is clear. If it's a point, they should only be using pencils. Again, people come in with things besides pencils, so then I don't have the sympathy, right? But same thing, they could point it out and then make another clear if it's a line graph. Connect the dots, if you miss 2 dots. A lot of times if they don't use colors, they get confused about which 2 dots they need to connect from one point in time to the next, and so they end up crisscrossing them. So that's something, if they start out indicating the dots with the colors, then they won't be confused when it's time for them to actually connect the dots. But they can, if they're in a rush, cross it out and do it again.
Do you tell them whether to do a bar chart or a line
I
chart?
do not. So that is one
Or
of
they can
the-
do it based on the data, they have to make a decision?
Correct.
Okay.
And there's two clear kinds. Some of them, in the real world, it really could be either one. But what we're trying to do is, if it's something over time, that has to be a line graph. So they can recognize that. Because the points, the information on the line that's between the points is real information. If it's discrete, the number of animals in the zoo, the number of days it rained, that is clearly a bar graph. And then I try not to make it something that's subjective, because I really do want, see, and the reason I do that, the line graph's easier, the bar graph's easier, otherwise everyone just does a bar, and it does mean something in the real world in terms of what that graph means.
I just want to understand what the
Yep.
criteria was. So, good. Thanks.
Okay, so the next section is about the graph. The scoring rubric, in general, it stayed the same, other than the fact that the whole graph will be worth more. So, label and units on x-axis, labels and units on the y-axis, a title, a key, the scale of how they lay out the graph. So you don't pick a y-axis that makes your graph really tiny on a piece of paper. That's something I need to consider. The intervals need to be even. You can't start 10, 20, and then start, 50, because I'm not going to get high enough. You need to think about that ahead of time and pick the appropriate interval. Lines count, I realize it's timed, but it doesn't take more time to use a ruler to draw your axis, to draw the line between the 2 points on a line graph. And then if a point is wrong, meaning it's not in the right coordinate based on their axis, then that would be minus a point. Any questions on the graphing portion?
Did you say you were giving a graph paper for this?
Yes.
Do you know what size?
One-sided graph paper, ½ inch. There's actually a file on the website that is the actual file we use to make the photocopies from.
How many points is the total? Like, how many points on the graph?
Yeah, I've not made the test yet, so that's why it's about 40%.
Can I ask you about a different kind of graph, or you can go through each of?
The only kind that you will have to graph, or kids will have to graph, is a line graph or a bar graph.
Well, my question, and this is from tests probably 7, 8 years ago. There was a pie graph, and it's pretty easy for 5th graders to figure out if it's based on 100%. But then they had a question that they changed.
The total number.
Total number. And
So it's still 100%.
well,
It's just that the total number that equaled 100% changed.
right. And 5th graders, I don't.
So
Some of them know the inverse operation, and some of them may not have gotten there yet, because I asked our 5th grade math teachers how they would have a child solve that. Are you going to be using that?
absolutely.
Okay.
And people are relatively successful with that question.
Okay.
So then, yeah. you just-
That's the one that separates the ones that know it from the ones that don't. Everything else is pretty easy in my experience.
So, okay, so we've moved on to the multiple choice part of the test. That's okay. We're done with the graphing portion. Yeah, so the pie charts, we do try to keep the numbers though, so that they can certainly use their calculators, but they could get through it. In that case, you might tell them, if it's doubled, then there's no inverse ratio required, it's just double.
Right.
Right? So there's some tips you could, and
Will you-
scenarios you can point out that.
Will you do like 150 or 250? Or are you gonna stick with 100, 200, 400, 500?
No, the question she's referring to is, you know, there were, originally there were like, I don't know,
I remember some of the question, I guess.
100 animals in a zoo, and then one, that was the actual graph, and then there'll be a question that says, if there were 200 animals in the zoo, how many would have been alligators? And so it would have been double.
Right, I get that, and my point is, if you're doubling it, that's pretty easy too, and I've been trying to work with my kids on, what if it's 150 kids? It's not double,
Correct.
right?
But that seems to be pretty simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I don't know how all the other events are working, but we also look at the overall scores over time. And the object isn't for 80 teams to get 90% on this test. So the kids should still be having fun and learning some extracurricular activity. I do realize it's a competition, but we are trying to figure out how to differentiate and still make it something that's, you know, you walk out of it and at least feel like the kids did a good job, right? I'm not trying to turn them off from it, but when we end up getting too many. So I think I had hard questions and everybody's successful. We're like, oh, I guess that's not a hard question, so we need to come up with something different. Did you have a question? No? Oh, sorry. Okay, so another type of question that or type of graph we added was Venn diagrams. I know they introduced Venn diagrams in elementary school. So there's an example of Venn diagram there. There's an example of the bar graph. And the format is, you know, I'll have a graph at the top of the page and 4 to 6 questions about that graph, interpreting that graph. There's actually a sample test on the website as well from a prior year. If someone hadn't pointed that out. And then an example of what like a graphing question would look like. Something that they would see. They'd be given this question and then this set of data and they'd be expected to graph it on the graph paper.
I know you had mentioned when they were doing the graphing portion, you know, the bar and the line, you stay away from histograms?
Yes, only in bars and lines, yeah. Something else additional is there will be questions for them to answer about the graph that they just made. Just as another way to separate folks, so if your graph was accurate, you're going to answer the questions accurately. And there's one here, just as kind of how. So there was, this was about 2 different zoos. The student would graph that data, and then they would begin to answer the questions. So the example question, well, which animal had equal amounts? So they would look for the bar that was the same height. Okay. Just some other resources. This is definitions of the terminology in the graphing rubric. There are some websites to just look for example graphs. You can certainly come up with them on your own, you know, as you're trading them. Not limited to this, you can graphs anywhere. Newspaper, USA Today always has a graph on the front page. I don't know if Time for Kids, schools are still doing that or not, if it got cut. That's a great resource if your school still has, because they always have many graphs and simple questions that go along with it. All their textbooks have graphs in them. Believe it or not, the history book, even more than the math book. So, just as resources for you to come up with ways to practice. And then that takes me to the end of the handout. Any other questions?
Multiple choice is Scantron, did you say?
Yes, it is Scantron.
And they just stay in one station, they don't move?
Right, right.
Are they going to, I don't know the terminology, but are they going to have to at any point on the test say, know the definitions?
Not regurgitate the definition specifically,
Okay.
but there could be a question. And yeah. So for the beans graph, there's a question that says, what's the good name for the y-axis, so you have to know what a y-axis is.
But they won't actually have to.
Right.
With the Venn diagrams, what's the maximum number of, I think, is it called the subsets, like the maximum number of circles we would see, or they would see?
I don't know that you can pin me down,
Okay.
possibly,
We will go into 3.
yeah, three, definitely, at least, it could be definitely at least 3. I don't know if I don't think I've decided if I'd go to 4 yet. I have to look back and see how everybody did on it last year. Oops.
Okay. The time frame you said that multiple choice, they do together in one spot, they could tear that apart and divide and conquer,